Hi, welcome to day 2 V4. In this we will talk about how to use the data types or various data types that we can use in Java. Yeah. So basically in the previous video we have seen if we are working with the data, some sort of data, most of your programs will have data in one or the other way. Then we need to use memory to store the data. And whenever we're using memory, by default, memory comes with an address, which normally system uses, computer uses, but address is a bit large, hexadecimal number. So normally every compiler, every language, whenever you are working with the data and using memory, they will allow you to name the memory with whatever you want. Yeah. So that's where we will start naming the memory where we store the data, and that name could be anything like A, B, X, or anything like that. We will talk about the naming conventions later. But normally whenever your program needs data, then you will end up using variables. Yeah. And whenever we're using variables, one thing which is important is data type. So what type of data that you're going to store? And that is important because compiler want to make sure few things. One is sufficient space is reserved to store that data, because we need less data, for example, to store 2 than to store 2.3, and then to store something like hello, right? So this data probably can be stored in, let's say, 2 byte or 4 byte, whereas this probably requires 8 byte to store because you have decimal representation. And this is something like a large string where we need a little more data, right? So to store sufficient, to store the type of data that you are using, we need to reserve sufficient memory. Yeah. So that's why we need to inform compiler that I am going to use this type of data by specifying the data type. So that's how we're going to do it. For example, let's say the requirement is add two numbers, yeah, and show the results is your requirement, for example. Yeah. Now, if you wanted to do this programmer, if you wanted to code this, normally your requirement will be like you want to store two numbers first of all. Yeah. So that is the first step, store two numbers. Yeah. And then perform the operation, perform that addition operation and store the result, right? So you want to store the result and finally display the result. That's what we finally will do, right? So it means my program needs to handle data, right? Definitely two numbers. Now I need to ask computer to give me a space where I can hold two numbers, and I will tell a computer, or I will tell a system that I want to call the first number as A and second number as B. So the place where I'm going to store the first number and second number, so the name I want to give it is A and B. Yeah. And then I also want to say that I want one more space where I'm going to store the result. So probably I want to call this as result. Yeah. And I need to tell system that I'm going to work with only integer numbers. For example, 25 is first number, 63 is my second number. And obviously this output is going to be again, when I add these two numbers, it is going to be some output which I'm going to store here in the result, but that is again going to be a numeric type. So I need to explicitly specify to computer that I wanted a place called A, which is going to be holding a numeric type. And in Java, a numeric type is represented in four different ways, or multiple ways actually. One among them is int, int. Int stands for integer. Yeah. So I just need to tell system that I want integer A. Yeah. So what it means is I am requesting system to give me a space where I can store integer number, and that I want to call it as A. So similarly, I will call integer b. I will write another statement in my program, something like this, integer b, where I'm saying I wanted to store another number, and that is going to be an integer type, and I'm going to actually call it as b. and then I'm going to say I also want one more space which is called result. So I wanted to reserve one more place which I wanted to call it as result. Yeah, then I can probably assign the numbers like a equal to 25. Okay, so basically you will simply say a equal to 25. Yeah, just for an example. So now what happens? System is going to store 25 in this place. Similarly, I'm saying b equal to 63. So here now 63 is going to be placed. Yeah. Now I will say the result, which is my third variable, is equal to a plus b. So result, I'm going to store what? The value of a. When we say a plus b, in the system actually looks at what is a. A is a variable. What is a contains? A contains 25. So essentially internally what it does is it performs 25 plus what is b? B is a variable which is 63. So this operation it is going to perform, and whatever the result that comes is going to be stored in result, which is another variable, third variable. So whenever you're working with this kind of data, right? So you're going to first make sure you declare the variables which you're going to use. And this is called the declaration. This is called declaration of variable. Declaration of variable. So declaration of variable contains two things. One is the name of the variable that I wanted to use and the data type of the variable. So this particular data type that we are using here, yeah, it is going to tell compiler how much memory to reserve. Also, it will inform compiler that make sure going forward I will only store integer number here. For example, instead of this, by any chance if I write a equal to 2.3, right, then system will either give me a compilation error saying that you can't do this because you have declared a as integer, which only holds the regular natural numbers, not decimal numbers. Yeah, if you wanted to use decimal number, you have to use something else. Yeah, so that something else is what we're going to see now. So in case of Java, right, so we have, if you wanted to work with numbers, then we have a data type called byte, another one called short, third one called int, and fourth one is called long. Yeah, so byte, as the name suggests, it just stores or allocates 1 byte of information or 1 byte of memory, wherein you can store smaller numbers like 1, 2 digit, 3 digit numbers basically. Yeah, whereas short actually reserves the double the size of byte, which is 2 byte, and allows us to store slightly bigger numbers. Int stores or allocates double the size of byte and allows us to store further bigger numbers. And long again allocates again double the size of integer and allows us to store larger numbers. So depending upon what type of number you are working with, you will use specifically a particular data type. And most often in your program, you probably encounter this, and occasionally you will probably work with long. But most often you will see in your day-to-day programs you will use int. Yeah. Now what you need to do is you need to Google and figure out, if I use for example byte a as a variable, how much data I can store here, how big data I can store. Okay, like can I store 1000, can I store for example this number. Yeah, because the space whatever is allocated is small. So how much I can store? So if you Google, it will tell you what is the range of numbers that you can store. Yeah, similarly for short, int and long, you try to find out. So in the next video we'll see how to store the decimal numbers.